Number 4, we have to fight terrorists in a way that does not create more terrorists. For example, in a dangerous world, terrorists uh, seek out places where it's often impossible to capture them or to count on local governments to do so. And that means the best option for us to get those terrorists is becomes a targeted strike. So we have taken action under my command, including with drones, to remove terrorists from the battlefield, which protects our troops and has prevented real threats to the American people. Now, under rules that I put in place and that I made public, before any strike is taken outside of a war zone, there must be near certainty that no civilians will be killed or injured. And while nothing is certain in any strike, and we have acknowledged that there are tragic instances where innocents have been killed by our strikes, this is the highest standard that we can set. Nevertheless, we still have critics who suggest that these strikes are wrong. And I say to them, you have to weigh the alternatives. Drone strikes allow us to deny terrorists a safe haven without airstrikes, which are less precise, or invasions that are much more likely to kill innocent civilians as well as American service members. So the actions that we've taken have saved lives at home and abroad. But the point is that we do have to be careful to make sure that when we take actions, we're not alienating local populations, because that will serve as recruitment for new terrorists. Number 5, transparency and accountability serve our national security, not just in times of peace, but more importantly, in times of conflict. And that's why we've made public information about which terrorist organizations we're fighting and why we're fighting them. We've released assessments of non-combatants killed in our operations, taken responsibility when mistakes are made. We've declassified information about interrogation methods that were wrong, so we learn from past mistakes. And yesterday, I directed our government for the first time to release a full description of the legal and policy frameworks that guide our military operations around the world. This public information allows for a more informed public debate, and it provides a potential check on unfettered executive power. The power of the presidency is awesome, but it is supposed to be bound by you, our citizens. But here's the thing, that information doesn't mean anything. It doesn't work if the people's representatives in Congress don't do their jobs, if they're not paying attention. Right now, we are waging war under authorities provided by Congress over 15 years ago. 15 years ago. I had no gray hair 15 years ago. 2 years ago, I asked Congress, let's update the authorization. Provide us a new authorization for the war against the ISIL, reflecting the changing nature of the threats, reflecting the lessons that we learned from the last decade. So far, Congress has refused to take a vote. Democracies should not operate in a state of permanently authorized war. That's not good for our military. That's not good for our democracy. And by the way, part of the reason that's dangerous is because today, with our outstanding all-volunteer force, only 1% of the population is actually fighting, which means that you are carrying the burden, which means that it's important for us to know what it is that we're doing and have to explain what we're doing to the public, because it becomes too easy to just send 1% of the population out to do things even if they're not well thought through. If a threat is serious enough to require the sacrifice of our men and women in uniform, then members of Congress should at least have the courage to make clear where they stand, not on the sidelines, not on cable TV shows, but by fulfilling their constitutional duty and authorizing the use of force against the threats that we face today. That's how democracies are supposed to work. Number 6, alongside our outstanding military work, we have to draw upon the strength of our diplomacy. Terrorists will love to see us walk away from the type of work that builds international coalitions and ends conflicts and stops the spread of deadly weapons. It would make life easier for them. It would be a tragic mistake for us. Just think about what we've done these last 8 years without firing a shot. We've rolled back Iran's nuclear program. That's not just my assessment. That's the assessment of Israeli intelligence, even though they were opposed to the deal. We've secured nuclear materials around the globe, reducing the risk that they fall into the hands of terrorists. We've eliminated Syria's declared chemical weapons program. All of these steps have helped keep us safe and help keep our troops safe. Those are the result of diplomacy. And sustained diplomatic efforts, no matter how frustrating or difficult they sometimes appear, are going to be required to resolve the conflicts roiling in the Middle East, from Yemen to Syria to Israel and Palestine. And if we don't have strong efforts there, the more you will be called upon to clean up after the failure of diplomacy. Similarly, any long-term strategy to reduce the threat of terrorism depends on investments that strengthen some of these fragile societies. Our generals, our commanders understand this. This is not charity. It's fundamental to our national security. A dollar spent on development is worth a lot more than a dollar spent fighting a war. This is how we prevent conflicts from starting in the first place. This is how we can ensure that peace is lasting after we fought. It's how we stop people from falling prey to extremism, because children are going to school and they can think for themselves, and families can feed themselves and aren't desperate, and communities are not ravaged by diseases, and countries are not devastated by climate changes. As Americans, we have to see the value of empowering civil societies so that there are outlets for people's frustrations. And we have to support entrepreneurs who want to build businesses instead of destroying. We have to invest in young people, because the areas that are generating terrorists are typically having a huge youth bulge, which makes them more dangerous. And there are times where we need to help refugees who have escaped the horrors of war in search of a better life. Our military recognizes that these issues of governance and human dignity and development are vital to our security. It's central to our plans in places like Afghanistan and Iraq. Let's make sure that this wisdom is reflected in our budgets as well.